"You don't belong up here. Take your bag and move." Marcus Bell did not answer right away. He set his coffee cup down on the little glass table beside the leather chair, slowly, the way a man sets down something he is not ready to let go of. Outside the window of the Continental Skyline Lounge at Charlotte Douglas International, the morning sky was the color of wet concrete, and a line of regional jets sat nose to nose on the tarmac like patient animals waiting to be fed. Rewind 6 hours before that sentence was ever spoken. Because you need to understand what was happening under the surface before you understand what happened on it. The lounge smelled of espresso and warm cinnamon rolls. Somewhere a saxophone hummed low through hidden speakers. A gas fireplace flickered against a stone wall that had never once needed to keep anyone warm. Marcus sat by the rain-streaked window in a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of running shoes that had clearly seen a few thousand miles. His only visible possession of any value was a leather duffel bag, cracked at the corners. The kind of bag a father hands down instead of throwing away. He was 41 years old. Founder and chief executive of a company called Ledgerline Systems, the software backbone that told nearly every mid-size American airline whether a crew was legal to fly, whether a tank had enough fuel, whether a bag was cleared to load, whether a jet bridge could safely open its door. Passengers never saw Ledgerline. They saw boarding music and warm towels. Marcus built the invisible skeleton underneath all of it. And Continental Skyline Airways, the airline whose lounge chair he was currently sitting in, was Ledgerline's single largest client. $14 million a year, 412 aircraft. Nobody in that lounge knew that. Marcus preferred it that way. His father, Walter Bell, had spent 31 years driving a delivery truck through the snow of Youngstown, Ohio, wearing a company jacket 2 sizes too big because the good ones went to the drivers with seniority. Walter used to say the same 6 words to his son every single morning before school. "Don't ask them to see you." Marcus never fully understood that sentence until the year Ledgerline's server room caught fire and his father, retired by then, 73 years old, drove 400 miles overnight just to sit outside the building so his son wouldn't be alone. Walter never once asked to come inside where it was warm. He waited in the truck. That was the whole philosophy of the man, folded into one gesture. Never ask to be let in anywhere. Build the door yourself. Marcus built the door. He just never bothered to put his name on it in gold letters. A server named Denise Fairbanks moved between the tables with a silver pot of coffee and the particular radar of someone who had worked luxury service for 11 years and prided herself on knowing exactly who mattered before they had to ask. She refilled a cup for a silver-haired man in a navy blazer without being asked twice. She laughed at his joke about turbulence. She swept warm croissants onto a china plate for an older couple in matching cashmere, bending at the waist, calling them by name. Because she had checked the manifest that morning and memorized which names came with which faces, she passed Marcus 3 times. Each time her eyes swept over him. The hoodie, the sneakers, the duffel bag with its broken zipper pull, and each time she found a reason to keep walking. Not once did she offer him coffee. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. He had learned over 20 years of walking into rooms built for people who assumed he'd wandered in from the parking lot exactly how to keep his face still while something old and familiar tightened in his chest. 8:47 a.m. The gate agent's voice came over the lounge speaker. Continental Skyline Flight 2 foreign to Denver, first-class passengers may proceed to Gate B12. Marcus zipped his duffel and stood. At the boarding counter stood a woman named Patricia Vance, 56 years old, silver blonde hair pulled into a twist so tight it looked painful, reading glasses on a thin gold chain resting against her blazer. She had been a gate supervisor for Continental Skyline for 19 years, and she ran her gate the way other people run inheritances. like something she alone had the right to protect. She waved the couple ahead of Marcus through with a warm, practiced smile. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell. Enjoy Denver." Then Marcus stepped up and held out his phone. The smile disappeared before the scanner even beeped. "There's an issue with your seat," Patricia said, not looking up. Her voice stayed calm, professional, the kind of voice that could be repeated back later and sound perfectly reasonable on a recording. That was the skill of it. Marcus kept his voice even. "Seat 2A, confirmed 6 weeks ago. Systems showing a reassignment. Aircraft change this morning." Marcus had run 412 of these tail numbers through Ledgerline's own dispatch software that very week. He knew, the way a locksmith knows a lock, that Flight 2 Martine's aircraft had not changed. There had been no maintenance swap, no weight and balance alert, no catering shift, nothing in the system that would explain a sudden loss of a confirmed first-class seat. "What's the new assignment?" he asked. Patricia tapped twice and did not blink. "Economy." "Seat 34C, middle seat." Behind him, a man in the line muttered something under his breath. The Caldwells, already at the jet bridge door, paused just long enough to pretend they weren't listening. "You released my seat," Marcus said quietly. "I'm only telling you what the system shows, sir." "No," Marcus said. "You're telling me what you've decided I should accept." Color rose in Patricia's cheeks. Not shame, something closer to insult, as if a man in a hoodie had no business correcting her in front of a line of paying customers. A senior flight attendant named Roger Castle stepped out from the jet bridge doorway to see what was slowing things down. He was 49, square-jawed, built like a man who had spent 2 decades being obeyed the moment he raised his voice. He looked at Patricia first, then at Marcus, and his verdict arrived before either of them had said a single word to him. "Problem here." "He's refusing his reassignment," Patricia said, eyes still on Marcus. "I'm asking why a paid first-class seat was taken from me," Marcus said. Roger's smile did not reach his eyes. "Sir, we have a schedule. If you've been reassigned, please take your seat. Customer relations can sort out compensation after landing. This isn't about compensation." "It usually is," Roger said, and something in the way he said it, flat, bored, final, told Marcus exactly how many times this exact scene had played out before, with exactly the same ending, in exactly this man's mind. A phone lifted somewhere behind him in the line. Not to help, just to catch the delay. Marcus thought of his father, sitting in a cold truck outside a burning building, refusing to ask anyone to let him in out of the rain. He thought, never beg for respect, make them answer for the lack of it. "Fine," he said. "I'll take 34C. Patricia exhaled, almost smiling, already turning to the next passenger. Roger stepped aside like a man closing a door he was relieved to be rid of. Marcus walked down the jet bridge without raising his voice, without a single backward glance, and without giving them the scene every phone in that line was hungry to record. Seat 34C was not a seat. It was a message, and Marcus Bell had received enough of those messages in his life to read this one perfectly. He found it wedged near the back of the aircraft, between a college student with wireless earbuds and a heavy-set man who had already claimed both armrests before boarding was even finished. The cabin smelled of stale pretzels and wet umbrellas. A toddler somewhere behind him began crying in the specific rising key that means it isn't stopping soon. Marcus folded himself into the middle seat, knees against the seat back in front of him, his father's old duffel barely fitting beneath it. Up front, past the blue curtain, first class was already settling into its quiet, real glasses, warm towels. A woman laughed softly at something the flight attendant said. His seat, 2A, had a window and room enough to breathe. Here, his elbows belonged to strangers. His dignity, apparently, belonged to airline discretion. The college student glanced over, pulled one earbud free. "Rough morning?" Marcus turned his head, met her eyes a half-second longer than the question required. "I'm sorry," she said. 2 words, simple, human, and they almost reached him. Almost. Roger walked the aisle checking overhead bins with theatrical care, stopping at row 34 just long enough to say, "All settled now, sir." The word sir, wrapped so tightly in triumph, it barely qualified as respect at all. The plane pushed back from the gate. Engines rose from a whine to a hum beneath the floor. Marcus looked down at his hands. They were steady. That surprised even him. Something colder than anger was building behind his ribs. Not rage, which wastes motion, but calculation, clean and exact. He waited until the seatbelt sign chimed off over Tennessee, then pulled out his phone and called a woman named Priya Anand. She answered on the second ring. Marcus. Her voice sharpened instantly. She knew he never called mid-flight, unless something was wrong. "Initiate night watch on the Continental Skyline account," he said. Silence. Then carefully, "Marcus, that's a full contractual freeze. It's never been triggered. It's being triggered now. Are we compromised?" "Not compromised," he said, watching the seat back in front of him. "Exposed. Authorization code," she said. "All business now. Bell. 7. Ground operations only. No aircraft in flight, no safety systems, full contractual lock across scheduling, crew validation, ground movement, baggage routing, fuel release, and gate clearance." A pause. Keys tapping. "Confirmed," Priya said. "Once executed, Continental Skyline loses right access system-wide until manual compliance release." Marcus closed his eyes. He saw Denise's gaze sliding past him 3 times, Patricia's practiced calm, Roger's small, bored smile. "Execute," he said. At the front of the aircraft, a heavy door thudded shut 1,000 miles away, in an operations center in Fort Worth, Texas, where nobody yet knew that the ground beneath 412 airplanes had just quietly stopped holding them up. The first warning appeared as a thin amber line on a wall-sized screen at Continental Skyline's Operations Center in Fort Worth. Nobody panicked. Not yet. A dispatcher named Grace Whitfield, 34 years old, 3 cups of coffee deep into a night shift that was supposed to end in 40 minutes, clicked dispatch validation on a flight ready to push back from Denver. Denied. She clicked again. Denied. She frowned, tried a 3rd time, and got the same flat answer. Across the aisle, a coordinator named Devin Marsh looked up. "What is it?" "Denver just failed. Crew's legal, aircraft's fueled, gates clear, and validation is denied." "Try it again." I did. 3 times. The words sat on the screen, plain and cold. Grace had been in this room for 6 years. She had lived through blizzards, through hurricanes rerouting half the East Coast, through a computer virus scare that turned out to be nothing. She had never once seen dispatch, simply refused to answer. Airlines run on permission, not intention. Permission to fuel, permission to load, permission to push back 180 tons of metal and trust it into the sky. Without that permission, a plane is just an expensive room full of strangers. "Anyone else seeing failures?" she called out, louder now. Hands went up around the room like a slow wave. Fuel approval frozen in Seattle, baggage locked in Boston, dispatch clearance not writing in Newark. On the main wall, amber lines deepened into orange, then red, spreading across the map the way a stain spreads through fabric. Not fast, but unstoppable. Her supervisor, a heavy-set man named Harlan Cobb, 58 years old, strode over with a paper coffee cup he had stopped drinking from the moment he saw the wall. "What am I looking at?" "System-wide write failures. Not regional, not weather. Vendor outage? No. Read access is fine. We can see everything. We just can't move anything." "Get legal," Harlan said. "Get Ledgerline on the phone. Now." A banner crawled across the top of the main screen. "Integrity hold active. Contractual freeze. Ledgerline Systems." Beneath it, a counter began climbing. 6 aircraft grounded. 19. 41. A young dispatcher near the front whispered, "What is happening?" and nobody answered, because a system failure can be fixed by morning. This looked deliberate, and deliberate things do not fix themselves. In a glass office above the operations floor, the chief operating officer, a man named Thomas Ridley, arrived with his tie loosened and sleep still in the corners of his eyes. Someone had called him at home. His driver had been called before he finished his first cup of coffee. One look at the wall told him this was not routine. "What failed?" he asked. Harlan handed him a tablet. "Nothing failed, sir. That's the problem." Ridley read the banner twice. Every executive at Continental Skyline knew what Ledgerline was. It wasn't a convenience they could replace with a spreadsheet and a phone tree. It was the spine underneath the airline's skin. "Who authorized this freeze?" Ridley asked. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Account key belongs to Marcus Bell." Ridley went very still. Then Grace turned from her console, pale. "Sir, there's an incident report from Charlotte, Gate B12. A first-class passenger was reassigned to economy this morning."
"Which passenger?"
Grace looked down at the report again, and her voice went smaller when she answered. "Marcus Bell." Nobody in the room moved for a long moment. Somewhere above the Rockies, 35,000 feet up, Marcus Bell sat with his hands folded in his lap in seat 34C, eyes closed, while the company that had made him feel disposable that morning began to understand, in real time, what disposable actually meant. A flight attendant named Renee Ashby, 28, red hair, pulled into a tight knot, tired, kind eyes, came down the aisle with a tray of water cups and stopped at row 34. "Sir, would you like some water?" Marcus opened his eyes. "Thank you." She handed the cup over with both hands, careful not to spill, her gaze flicking to the cramped space around his knees and back to his face. "Long flight," she said softly. Not a question, an acknowledgement. "Longer for some than others," Marcus said. Behind the curtain, first class laughed low and easy. Glass touched glass. Someone asked for another pillow, and Roger's voice answered warmly. "Of course, right away." The exact same voice he had used on Marcus at the gate, except now it carried none of the flatness, none of the boredom, all of the performance restored for an audience that had never been made to prove it deserved it. Marcus looked down at the water in his hand. It trembled slightly, not from turbulence. The captain's voice came over the speaker, smooth and unaware. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising comfortably, expecting an on-time arrival into Denver." Marcus almost smiled at the word "on time," because somewhere below, in a glass office in Fort Worth, men in expensive suits were learning that arrival and control had never been the same thing. A businessman 2 rows ahead refreshed his phone through the weak onboard signal and frowned. "Huh. Looks like Continental Skyline's having some kind of system meltdown." The word moved through the cabin the way a draft moves under a door. "Grounded everywhere," someone whispered. "Denver, Seattle, Boston. People posting from the gates." The college student beside Marcus lowered her phone slowly, looked at him, though she could not have said why. Some instincts arrive before the facts do. "Can you imagine being stuck on the ground right now?" the businessman said, half to himself. Marcus looked toward the curtain that divided the cabin in two. "Some people were stuck long before the planes were," he said quietly. The plane began its descent into Denver under a bruised gray sky. The seatbelt sign chimed. Shades lifted one by one, spilling flat morning light across faces that had not slept well and now would sleep even less. But the quiet in the cabin had changed texture. It was no longer the ordinary hush of landing. It was the particular silence of people reading the same headline and slowly realizing they were sitting inside it. Roger Cassell stood in the forward galley, with one hand braced on the counter, 3 news articles deep, his stomach understanding the truth several seconds before his mind allowed it. Charlotte incident, first-class downgrade, founder and CEO of Ledgerline Systems. The name had not been in the first headline. It was in every headline now. In row 34, the college student's phone lit up in both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. She looked at Marcus, really looked this time, past the hoodie, past the sneakers, at the stillness she had mistaken that morning for sadness, when it had actually been control the entire time. "Are you
Are you Marcus Bell?
The heavy-set man by the window sat up so fast he pulled his shoulder away from Marcus's arm, as though space itself had suddenly become something owed. Before Marcus could answer, Renee appeared in the aisle, pale, a cabin tablet held against her chest with both hands. "Mr. Bell," she said. The nearby rows went silent around the name, the way a held breath goes silent. "The captain would like to speak with you after we land. Corporate leadership has already contacted the flight deck." "I'm sorry," she added. Quiet, unscripted, simply a young woman saying what the whole airline should have said hours earlier. The aircraft touched down hard enough to rattle the overhead bins. Nobody clapped. Passengers stood in the aisle with bags, half lifted, phones glowing, nobody pushing forward, because even the people who always rush the door understood that something larger than a connecting flight was blocking this one. Marcus rose from seat 34C. The college student stepped back to let him pass, face tight with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For not seeing it sooner," she said. There was no anger in his eyes when he answered, and somehow that made it worse. "That's what survives," he said, "when decent people notice too late." At the front of the plane, Roger stood by the galley, both hands clasped, all his color gone. "Mr. Bell," he started, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus stopped. Phones lifted around the cabin. Not high, not obvious, but enough. "A misunderstanding requires two confused people," he said. "I was never confused." "I was following the information from the gate," Roger said, his voice cracking on the last word. "No," Marcus said. "You were following a story you already believed. You looked at me and decided I was asking for something I hadn't earned." Roger's eyes dropped. The first-class cabin behind him had gone completely silent. A man who'd laughed 20 minutes earlier stared at his shoes. A woman gripped her phone with both hands like it might steady her. The captain, a gray-haired man named Douglas Farrow, appeared in the cockpit doorway with his hat under one arm. "Mr. Bell, corporate leadership is waiting at the gate. They're asking to speak with you immediately." Through the open door, Marcus could see them already. Dark suits, tight faces, a woman clutching a legal folder to her chest. Airport security standing too straight, a communications officer checking her phone with visibly shaking hands. Consequences, he thought, always arrive wearing better shoes than the people who caused them. Thomas Ridley moved toward him fast in the jet bridge, then caught himself and slowed. "Mr. Bell, on behalf of Continental Skyline, I want to offer our deepest apology." Apology for what, Marcus said, not stopping. For the Ridley hesitated, the improper reassignment. Marcus turned to face him fully. A printer can be improperly assigned. A cart can be improperly routed. A man is not improperly reassigned when your employees look at his clothes and his skin and decide his ticket is negotiable. Ridley went quiet. Behind him, the legal officer lowered her eyes to the folder in her hands. Robert Langston, the chief executive of Continental Skyline, appeared on a conference screen from the airline's New York office. 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had smoothed over union disputes and lawsuits and fuel price shocks for 2 decades by knowing exactly how long people stay angry before they get tired. This storm had a name, and names don't get tired. "Marcus," he began, "I want you to know personally how sorry I am." Marcus said nothing. "What happened in Charlotte does not reflect who we are as a company. It reflects exactly who you are when nobody important is watching," Marcus said. The room went still. Ridley stared at the table. The communications director stopped typing mid-sentence. Langston's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "We're prepared to offer a full refund, significant compensation, lifetime top-tier status, and a public apology." "You're trying to buy back embarrassment," Marcus said. "I'm here to discuss accountability." One of the attorneys, a precise, exhausted-looking woman named Carol Yates, leaned forward. "Mr. Bell, with respect, The freeze is causing enormous harm to thousands of passengers who had nothing to do with this. I agree, Marcus said, and that plainly surprised her. Innocent passengers shouldn't suffer because your company built a culture where a person's dignity depends on how expensive their shoes look, which is why this conversation should move quickly. What do you want? Langston asked, his voice hardening now. Marcus set a folder on the table. The sound was soft. Everyone in the room heard it anyway. 3 conditions, he said. First, Patricia Vance and Roger Cassell are terminated today. Not transferred. Not quietly retrained somewhere else where this happens again to somebody else. Terminated, on the record, for discriminatory conduct and abuse of authority. The regional vice president in the corner flinched. Second, you issue a public statement within the hour, and it names what happened plainly. Racial bias, wrongful downgrade, not customer experience language, not vague regret. The communications director went pale. Third, Continental Skyline funds an independent passenger dignity oversight program, $40 million over 10 years, external auditors, annual public reporting, mandatory de-escalation certification for every gate agent, flight attendant, supervisor, and captain in the company. You want to dictate our internal culture, Langston said. No, Marcus said. Your internal culture brought us to this room. I want outside accountability, because your culture has clearly proven it cannot police itself. Langston stared through the screen for a long moment, jaw working. You're asking me to humiliate my own company. No, Marcus said, quiet and final. Your company did that in Charlotte at 7:52 this morning. I'm only asking you to tell the truth about it. Ridley took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes, and when he spoke, it was the first honest sentence anyone from the airline had offered all day. Robert, he said, we should accept. Langston looked at him through the screen. Jonathan, we should accept, Ridley repeated. Not because we're cornered. Because he's right. Something in the room shifted, not repaired, not forgiven, but pierced, finally, by something true. Langston closed his eyes. When he opened them, his voice had dropped an octave. Send the documents. They're already in your inbox, Marcus said. Then we sign. Robert Langston signed because there was, in the end, no cleaner way out. The public statement went live within the hour, and Langston delivered it himself, seated beneath the airline's own blue logo, his face visibly older than it had looked that morning. At gate B12 in Charlotte, our employees wrongfully downgraded Mr. Marcus Bell from his paid first-class seat after treating him through the lens of racial bias. They abused their authority. They failed him, and they failed the values we claim to represent. In Charlotte, Patricia Vance sat in a back office with her badge on the table in front of her. Hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had gone white, insisting over and over that she had only followed what the system showed her. Until an investigator slid a printout across the desk showing the override had been entered manually under her own login, 4 minutes before Marcus ever reached the counter. There had been no aircraft change that morning. There never had been. She had built the lie before she'd ever needed it, the way people do when they've told a version of it. So many times it started to feel true. In Denver, Roger Cassell took the call in a crew room with a paper cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He argued first, then he blamed the gate, then his voice cracked. I didn't know who he was, he said. The investigator on the line answered quietly. That was exactly the problem. Roger sat down slowly, and for the first time all day he understood that the issue had never been Marcus Bell's title. It was the fact that Roger had already decided who Marcus was before he ever opened his mouth, and would have made the exact same decision about a man in a hoodie who had no title at all, no airplanes waiting to freeze, no army of lawyers to send. That was the part that finally broke something loose in him. Not the firing. The realization that his own certainty, his own smiling, bored authority had been the whole disease, and it would have found some other innocent target eventually, whether or not that target happened to hold the keys to his career. Back at the jet bridge, Ridley brought Marcus the signed confirmation. "Terminations are complete," he said. "The statement is out. The oversight fund is announced. Independent auditing begins within 30 days. And the training," Marcus said. "Mandatory, everyone." "Mandatory, everyone," Ridley confirmed. There was no victory in his face. Only exhaustion, and maybe, underneath it, the beginning of something like honesty. Marcus called Priya. "Ready?" she asked. "Begin restoration," he said, watching a line of grounded aircraft sit silver and patient beneath the low Denver clouds. One by one, red turned to amber, amber to green. Crew validations cleared. Fuel approvals synchronized, baggage chains unlocked. By nightfall, Continental Skyline was flying again. But it was not the same company that had woken up that morning, and it never fully would be again. The sickness had been named out loud, in public, with a company logo behind it, and that mattered. Not because naming something fixes it completely, because silence is what had let it live for 19 years in the first place. 6 months later, Marcus Bell flew Continental Skyline again. Same route, Charlotte to Denver, same gate. He didn't need to. Ledgerline could have severed the contract the day of the freeze and taken its business elsewhere without losing a single client. He flew it anyway, in the same gray hoodie, the same duffel bag with its cracked corner, because his father used to say that a door you walk away from stays broken for the next person who tries it. At Gate B12, a new supervisor, a soft-spoken woman named Alicia Farrow, hired specifically under the new oversight program, greeted every passenger in the same even voice regardless of what they were wearing. When Marcus reached the counter, she scanned his pass, smiled the exact same smile she'd given the family ahead of him, and said, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Bell." No different, no smaller, no larger. In the lounge that morning, before boarding, a different server had refilled his coffee without being asked twice, the same as everyone else's. Small thing. Marcus almost didn't notice it. That was the point. He never spoke to a reporter about what happened in that room in Denver. He never posted about it, never wrote a book, never gave the interview 3 networks offered him. The only trace of it that lived on publicly was the $40 million fund quietly issuing its first annual report, 3 pages long, filled with numbers most people would skim past. Training hours completed, incident reports down, employee turnover in gate services falling for the first time in a decade. If this story reminded you of someone who was made to feel like they didn't belong somewhere they had every right to be, leave a comment with the words "Respect matters." And if you believe stories like this still need to be told, stay close. There's another one coming.